Hi, everybody. It's Bob O's. This is Theater Resources Unlimited, and it's our Friday True Community Gathering. I actually forgot to count how many this is. I think this is 115 or 16 consecutive weeks that we've been doing this since April 17th, 2020. Originally, it was a response to, guess what, COVID. It was our way of sort of helping people cope with being in isolation. So I was one of those people who thought that Zoom is it's no replacement for being together in a room live and in person. I said, no, this just can't be. But I calmed down. People took my hand and walked me through it. And I found out that if you can't be in a room with people and be live and in person, this is actually a great way to still have a community. We have people come here every weekend and talk about what they're up to and what they're doing. And I always have guests, and we talk about what's happening in the world and what's happening in the arts and what's happening with COVID. Hello, B5. We had COVID B5 now or something like that. I don't know. COVID is just out of control. So originally we were talking about making art in shutdown, and we're talking about podcasts, and we're talking about virtual productions. And my favorite question is, if we do a show in virtual, is it still theater? So you can chew on that one for a while. We have lots of different answers to that. Today we're in a different world than we were 2.5 years ago. Who even thought we were going to be in that world to begin with? But we were. We now are much more likely to be outside and going to places and going to shows. Theater is reopened. Mixed success, but it's definitely going in the right direction. And one of the things that we've also gotten a chance to talk about over the past 2.5 years is one of my pet peeves, which is we're not going to, my guests, don't worry, we're not actually going to go into this too much. But my pet peeves is that I never hear politicians talk about the arts. I never hear anybody talk about the importance of the arts. And I also feel that the arts are underfunded in our country. Does anybody not agree? So I like to have political conversations. And today I've got 3 guests who, well, they're very active in the political world. And I want to look at a couple of different issues. I want to look at the reopening of theater, yes, but I also want to look at how to balance the personal and the political. How do we take our beliefs and our passions, and what function does politics have in us making things happen that we want to have happen in our lives and in our world and in our community? I'm going to just bring them on. I want you to meet Leslie Boghosian-Murphy, Harrison Marks, and Aimee Todoroff. Leslie's been with us before. She was in one of these other conversations last year where I really was griping about, why does nobody talk about the arts? That was my big thing. We have other things I want to talk about today, but I don't mind touching on that. So Leslie, you ran last year for City Council in my district, right? It was here.
Yes, that's how we met. Remember how we met?
That's how I met Leslie. That's how I met Harrison. And that's also how I met Eric Botcher, who has been with us on other conversations. These people cold call as just a political technique. And much to their surprise, they find me. And I'm suddenly all over them about, what are your views on politics? What are we doing about the reopening of theater? So
we're the annoying calls when you're just about to sit down to have dinner, and we ask if you know anything about the race. That's what happened. And you said, I have a lot to tell you about local politics here in the arts. So that's how we met.
Yes. And Harrison has a similar conversation about that. Harrison Marks, who was running for the state assembly. First I met you at the corner of 23rd and 8th Avenue, I think. So you want to tell them
And
how
then
we
hours later, I believe, not even a phone call, but you got a ring at your doorbell from me, and
that's
there
right.
I am.
This one rang my bell. So, and had the same conversation with him that I had with you and I had with Eric. And Aimee has been a friend of mine for many years, and I think I've known you well before you even started the League of Independent Theater.
I came to many of the True events, the meet and greets, the all of the wonderful programming that you've been doing when I was primarily an actor, way back when I first moved to New York. So you were one of the first people that welcomed me into this community.
I didn't realize that. That was very smart of me, wasn't it? So let's go back one at a time, and I want you to meet our guests, and I'm going to have them tell you a little bit about. We'll get into why you went into politics later, but just tell us now, Leslie. You did. It was not a successful race for the city council seat, but that did not stop you. So what are you up to now?
No, it wasn't, but it was a good platform to speak about what some of us thought were important issues, including the arts. Right now, I am a vice president of Community Board 4, and for those of you who don't know what the Community Board is, it's a group of volunteers that are appointed. There's 50 of us in each community board, and our Community Board 4 is broken up mostly Hell's Kitchen and Chelsea. So the arts play a very predominant role in our specific district. So I am a vice chair of the community board. I actually sit on the Arts and Education Committee, and I am also the chair of the Budget Task Force. And what that is it's important to this conversation because the Budget Task Force gets together all of the committees: arts, education, transportation, housing and human services. And what we do is we every year create a list of what's called the Statement of District Needs. And what we think, the community, think it's important to fund. And then this list, which we prioritize and we detail extensively, we send to our local elected officials, and then they respond back what they will fund. And what do you guys think is always kicked to the bottom of the list?
The arts.
The arts, without a doubt. In fact, a lot of the times, as a member of the arts committee that sits on this budget task force, I'm actually fishing for things, like what can we put on this list in our community that is arts related, that would be attractive to elected officials that could be funded.
I have to tell you, the thing that grabbed my attention when you called me, when we started having this conversation, you immediately started talking about the unused real estate in the area and how you felt that there must be a way of putting that to better use in terms of supporting the arts with office space, rehearsal space, performance space, whatever. So you hooked me. That's when you hooked me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, COVID. Listen, our district was killed by COVID. A number of reasons, like other neighborhoods, but our neighborhood specifically is inextricably linked to theater, right? Theater and the arts, independent theater. And Aimee knows this as well. I mean, we have a lot of people who work behind the scenes. We have a lot of actors. We have a lot of independent contractors that live in Hell's Kitchen, in Chelsea, in our neighborhoods. And a lot of them left. A lot of them had no work, right? I mean,
I'm gonna hold you on it for a second because we're gonna come back to this because I want to do an overview first of our guests.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Harrison. You know what you told me that stuck in my head.
Tell me.
Your family's in theater. It's like, really, a politician who has a theater family. So tell us a little bit about your background and.
Yeah, not my parents are theater producers, but my family's connection to the arts in New York goes way back to the 1930s when my grandfather started in the music business as a teenager before he went into World War II, and then came back from the war, spent decades at Warner Music, instilled a love of music and art and theater in my father, and now both of my parents are theater producers. I grew up I grew up in Westchester in the suburbs, but came into the city all the time to see theater, and it's a passion of mine. Film is a passion of mine. And so but my background professionally is not in the arts. My background is that I'm a lawyer. I worked in the Obama administration. I've worked with our governor's office. And like Leslie, I ran for office a little bit more recently. I ran for state assembly. The election was less than a month ago. I too was not successful in the conventional sense, but I consider myself successful because I met so many amazing people, including Bob and including Leslie. And but one of the things that I was running on was sort of similar to Leslie, that I believe that our neighborhood needs to have its vitality restored. We've lost a lot in the last couple of years. A lot of stores closing down, theater closed, obviously, during the pandemic. And I think that now it's increasingly important, more than it ever was, to make certain that we have a vibrant art scene in our neighborhood, because people are able to work remotely. People are able to move away from their jobs in a way that they didn't necessarily used to be able to. And so that means that we need to make certain that our city maintains its vibrancy and livelihood, so that we retain people, we retain tourists. And so that is one of the things that I was campaigning on. I love Leslie's point about our physical spaces in the neighborhood and how can we use them to support artists and to make our neighborhood more vibrant. One of the things that I was proposing in the campaign was making it so that our vacant storefronts are given over to an organization like Chashama, which we can talk more about, which provides empty space to artists and art galleries, which I think is a great use of space for our neighborhood. But that's the long story short. Long history in caring about the arts, professional history in public service, law, business as well, politics now. And I am very excited for this conversation.
Thanks, Harrison. And surprised. I don't think you ever expected to get this phone call, did you? Aimee, give us a little bit of, we've met you, we know you, but give us a little bit of the background on LIT and what you do.
Well, hello again, everyone. My name is Aimee Todoroff. I'm the managing director of the League of Independent Theater. And it is always wonderful to hear these conversations because so much of this are things that we've been advocating for since 2008. The League was formed because in the wake of the financial crisis in 2008, all of our spaces were closing and artists were going other places. And we don't have a lack of space in New York. We have a lack of priority for how those spaces are used, particularly around the arts. We've really pushed forward the idea that arts are small businesses. Most of us are analogous to mom and pop businesses. We put more into the community than any other demographic, practically. And so we are a powerful economic engine for New York, not just for tourism, and tourism is certainly a big part of it, but for the people living in the neighborhoods in these communities. And one of the things that we learned over the pandemic that I want to bring into this space is arts are not just a culture issue, which is important, but we learned arts are a mental health issue. Arts were a senior's health issue. Arts were an education issue. Arts connect so much of the fiber of our city, and anytime that I can meet people that are willing to be partners in pushing forward the agenda for a strong, healthy arts ecosystem in New York, I'm just thrilled.
Well, I am too. I mean, you'll notice that I managed to find. I don't mean this in a bad way. Politicians who actually understand the arts. So basically, my quest has been fulfilled. I mean, I was going through a period of just going, why do no politicians have any understanding of the arts? I now know Eric, I know Leslie, I know Harrison, and of course, I've always known Aimee. But and now I can see that people do have a genuine understanding of the arts. And one of the things that I think is important for everybody to understand, and I think that Leslie and Harrison get it, is that when we talk about theater, it's not just Broadway. We are not. I mean, there's a lot of support going into bringing back commercial Broadway theater, and a lot of it's been very valuable and very helpful, and shows have survived because they've gotten huge amounts of funding. That's only part of our industry. And it's actually it's actually a relatively small part in some ways, because compared to like 60 Broadway shows or 40 Broadway shows this year, whatever, that opened during a year, off Broadway is like 800 to 1,000 productions that happen during the course of a year. The last statistic I saw was maybe 5 years ago, and that was like 1,000. There were 1,000 off Broadway shows that were being done. So small theater is a huge part of what our industry is, and it's not. And we know that the money is in Broadway, and from a quote political point of view, the economy certainly has a dependence on commercial theater and Broadway, but there's a lot more that we contribute to the economy as artists, as independent artists, as people that aren't necessarily working in the top rung Broadway level. So I'm grateful to have you guys. I want to get a little philosophical. One of the key things that I said in my description of this is, can we ever be sure we are working for the greater good, especially in the current social climate of violently opposing factions? I mean that clearly that means that we have agendas, and other people have different agendas than ours, and it's never been more painfully obvious than it is today. When we fight for the things we believe in, how do we know that they are also going to benefit the people that have different points of view, a different agenda? This goes to big political issues. It also goes to the arts. I mean, when we're fighting for money for the arts, how do we justify if we're taking money away from housing and from crime prevention and other issues? Does anybody want to? I mean, this is a very, very philosophical question, but does anybody want to jump into that? How do you know? How do you know that you're doing the right thing?
I wouldn't mind jumping in, because I think Aimee already said it, and I think she said it great. The arts it's equal, it parallel, and affects education. It affects mental health. It affects a lot of other things. People just like to say, oh, we're going to give money to the arts, and it's people painting pretty pictures or murals or this or that. And that's not necessarily what funding for the arts is. I mean, also you connect it directly in our district, in our neighborhoods, to affordable housing. I mean, directly to affordable housing. It's not even there's not even a bridge. It's really directly connected, because a lot of the people who need affordable housing or need to live where they work are in the arts community. So I don't know I mean, obviously you're right. It's a big philosophical question, and how do you know you're doing the right thing? But you're hoping, if you're funding the arts, it is enriching these other spokes. And I don't see it as taking money away. And Harrison or Aimee, you can agree or disagree. I don't see it as taking money away from other entities. I see it all working together, like symbiotically. But I don't know.
Harrison, do you want to jump in, and
Sure.
then Aimee?
I think the best way to understand if you're really benefiting the community is to be out there talking to people you're trying to impact, so that in the ideal world, you don't want people putting up an alternate policy and never actually engaging. And I think this is one of the roles of the community board, why we have that form of representation. It's something that I experienced for the first time in my life on the campaign trail over the last month.
I'm sorry, I lost you. You experienced on
the campaign trail over the last month.
There we go.
To thousands and thousands of people, I think, is the way that you understand what the impact that policy is having. It's something even that I experienced when I was working the Obama administration. Little known fact is that as the federal government issued regulations that are going to impact hundreds of millions of people.
You got to keep leaning in, because we're not hearing you otherwise.
Okay. As the federal government is issuing regulations that impact hundreds of millions of people, any member of the public is able to schedule a meeting to talk with the government about how that regulation is going to impact them. And that's something that almost no one takes advantage of, but policymakers are listening, or at least should be listening. individuals to understand whether policies are really having the effect they're intended to have. And then I think you can, that to me is the best way. The other thing about, should we take money from this area and put it somewhere else? And to me, and maybe this is just my business mindset and my experience working in regulatory policy, where this is the core analytical toolkit, is that you've got to run cost benefit analysis to understand how many dollars is it costing us, what is this getting us in return, and you can quantify almost anything. And so I think that at least having that as a toolkit, or within your toolkit, to measure and quantify the impact that you're having is an important policy making.
Aimee, did you want to add something to this? Since you started, you gave the original answer.
Well, I do agree with all that Harrison has said, and that everything Leslie has said. I think they're both spot on, even though there is that internal tension that I have as an artist about why do I have to justify art in terms of economic output or what it brings to these other industries. But at the same time, I understand that we do have to think about the audience we're speaking to, and we are asking for public dollars, so we have to demonstrate that public good. One of the things that I thought of as Leslie was speaking is that, during the pandemic, we also really learned that culture is a public safety issue. We had so many small businesses reaching out to us saying, please, can you get the theaters back open again? Because we have no foot traffic, and we don't have foot traffic. We have streets that become more hazardous. We don't have that healthy flow of people moving back and forth. So not only do small businesses not have people grabbing a drink after the show or getting an ice cream with their kids after a Saturday performance, you also don't have people moving up and down the street in a healthy way. So that's just another example of how culture does help everyone. But one of the things that we also do try to do as a league is find legislative programs that really do help artists, but that might not necessarily be art specific. So like the New York Health Act will so dramatically impact the quality of life for New York artists, but it will help everyone. So there is a two-way flow of advocacy that happens.
In the bigger issues, including women's reproductive rights right now, there are things that seem so obvious to us. I mean, it just seems so obvious that women's reproductive rights is healthy for all women, and yet when you start fighting for that, you come up against people who just see it completely differently. How do you know? How do you balance that? How do you know when what you're doing, if the people on the other side of an issue generally feel attacked or what's the word? Threatened by what your positions are. How do you know that you've taken the right position? I guess it's philosophy. It's hard to say. There probably is no answer to this. But what do you tell people on the other side of it? We're doing this for your good. They're telling us on their side of it, and the Supreme Court is still telling us we're doing this for your good. And we're sitting there going, no, absolutely not. No, stop this. How does politics ever become a conversation instead of a fight?
Bob, I feel like you were at my Thanksgiving table.
I was. I didn't know that you knew.
Yeah.
So how does anybody have any hypothetical response?
I think a lot of what any human being wants is to be listened to. And so whatever the outcome is, not everyone is going to be satisfied. But I think you can try to satisfy everyone in terms of listening to them. And I think if my philosophy in life, and I think this should be applied in greater amounts in politics, is that if you just make people feel like that you're hearing them, And you might not be able to act on what they're saying, but you respect them and you're taking the time to process, think about what they're saying. Then that goes a long way towards getting people what they want, which often I think is just being listened to, and at least calming tensions.
Aimee, any thoughts?
Yeah, it's so many. I think in a lot of ways, thinking about like these big, sort of greater cultural issues makes the problem seem so unwieldy and so difficult. And I think if you're going to spend your time being a political advocate or working towards a goal, you do have to balance out your capacity. So when I think about, talking to different politicians, trying to get some priorities moved through, there are some politicians that I just know we are so far away in terms of priorities that we don't, as a league, don't spend a ton of time trying to move the needle on that person, because we know that our time is valuable and our capacity is valuable. But then you think about, we've gotten into some conversations around legislation that we think on the surface is just really great and we're gung-ho for it. And then we start hearing from other perspectives, and you start to realize that when you bring it down to a local level, it's a lot easier to listen to what your neighbor is saying. So it is a challenge, but I do think when you think about impacting people for the good, there's just certain, going back to Bob's big question, like, how do you know you're doing the right thing? Are you harming people? Are you causing people harm? Those are the things that try to guide big philosophical questions.
And Bob, this has changed dramatically in the last 10 to 15 years, right? 10 or 15 years ago, the political conversation was not as charged or you're right, I'm wrong as it is now, right? It was just a different landscape. People worked together more. Just because someone was on a different political side of the fence than you were, it didn't mean you were adversarial all the time. It didn't mean you were enemies. And that has changed dramatically now. Now, with that being said, we are in a little bubble here in New York City. I mean, when we talk about differences, it's splitting hairs than when we talk about differences with the rest of the country. Like the examples you were mentioning, I'm a proud SAG-AFTRA card carrying member, right? I was a documentarian. And what I was as a documentary filmmaker able to do is not only travel the country, but travel the world. But traveling the country, when you go to other places in America and you listen to other people's stories, and it's so different on what they believe and what they think is right. And it was my job as Harrison, really just to sit and listen and ask them questions and kind of get it out of them, all on camera, of course. But you really think about that. They really believe this. They believe in their core, they're right. Like you said. I remember doing, I did a story on kids in prison for life without parole. Like they would go to prison at 14, 15, and law, and this was in Florida, said that they couldn't get out for life. And down there in Florida, it's different. It's the way of thinking is different. And you come up here in New York, and obviously, it's a more liberal attitude, or what we think a more accepting, understanding attitude. So it's very hard, but Harrison is right. People want to be listened to, and everyone thinks they're right. And it's very difficult, I think, in this climate than it was a few years ago.
It's brutal. It's just brutal. I think I'm one of the more modulated voices in my community, and I still can't make a dent when I'm trying to, I guess, defend a position that I know somebody else disagrees with. And I'm never telling them that they're wrong. I'm just saying I see it differently. I re-met a cousin of mine that I hadn't seen in like 30 years or so, and on Facebook, and we're talking, and he's telling me about his life and how unhappy it is, and I'm saying I'm here for him, and I'm happy that he's reached out to me, and I'm going to listen. At one point, he started talking about how much he hated Biden and Harris, and I just said, well, I don't have the same feelings that you do. I mean, I understand you feel this way. But I happen to think that Biden has done the best he could do with the shit show that was handed him, and that Harris, I think, I admire tremendously. He won't talk to me now. And that's all I said. I said I understand what you're saying, and so the conversation. Is anybody else having this difficulty with conversations? Is it me? Am I the problem?
One of the things that comes to mind, and I think it has to do with what Leslie was saying, is how, and the point you're making about how polarized things are, is very often I think we pick up on something that is a signifier. And as artists and people that know the arts, we're very perceptive. So if somebody says, I support X or I support this politician, suddenly we fill in all this other background information about them, whether it's true or not. Like your cousin did for you. He filled in all this information about who you are now based on his perception, because we do have a problem.
Oh, by the way, he's in Florida. He's in Florida, by the way. Oh boy.
I answered your question, Bob. Is anyone else having the same conversation? The honest answer for me is I'm not, and I think that's a big part of the problem. I don't know personally almost any people who are on the other side of the aisle, and I mean that I think is the crux of it. We are living in totally different worlds and different bubbles. We talked about Manhattan as its own bubble, but I just think a lot of us, or at least I, don't really interact with the other side of things, and that means that everything you just said, Aimee, is true. That in my head, I probably build up stereotypes about who they are, and I'm sure people on the other side of it are doing the same thing about people on our side, and I think one of the answers is more of us should be having more conversations on Facebook or otherwise, like the one that you had, Bob, because if half the people your cousin knew were Biden supporters, he couldn't do that, right? He couldn't just cut them all off. The problem is, I think he probably doesn't know that many Biden supporters, just like I don't know that many Trump supporters.
Well, it's an ongoing situation that we're all dealing with. I think that something that's so interesting is, I'm sure we've all been watching the congressional hearings, and everything seems so well presented and so indisputable and so, yeah, I mean, this makes such sense. And you hear people on the other side of the aisle testifying, and they're not people that are Trump haters, these are Trump supporters. And yet, how many people's minds are being changed by all of this? No, I mean, hardly anybody, probably. So I'm gonna move away from the hopelessness here, because I feel a little hopeless about the ability for us to communicate with each other today in today's world. As you said, Leslie, it's different. It was different 15 years ago. It's just been deteriorating in the past dozen years or so. So let's talk about something also related. What were your goals when you were running for office, and how have you taken those goals into what you're doing now? And are you able to find ways of fulfilling? The other question I always want to ask, and this is kind of an overview of everything. To what extent are the realities of politics? Do the realities of politics affect what you want to try to accomplish? That's it. Who wants to start? Harrison.
Yes, I
There
was
you are.
trying to figure out how to unmute.
And
So
by the way, your mic is much better now.
Oh, great. Okay. I had three major goals in my campaign. I mean, the overarching was making our neighborhood more livable, but the three goals were making our streets safer, making our housing more affordable, and filling in our vacant storefronts. But a larger part of that is what I was talking about earlier, which is making our neighborhood more vibrant. And in the last, so that's what I was trying to do. I had a very deep policy platform with a bunch of different pieces of legislation that I wanted to enact related to a lot of those things. in the last 3 weeks since the election on June 28th, to be honest, I haven't figured out how I'm going to continue advocating for the thing. It's hard. Losing an election is not the easiest thing, because you feel like you have a path, you have all these things you want to accomplish, and through the power of legislation. And obviously there are many other ways that you can accomplish anything.
Yeah, but it's also not it's not an easy step from having a policy and getting legislation passed.
That's true too. That is very true.
That rarely happens. It happens in a moment. It doesn't even happen in 10 years these days.
That is very true. But I have yet to determine how I'm going to channel all that into whatever the next step is. In part because I have spent a lot of the last 3 weeks reconnecting with my family, and it turns out being on the campaign trail it doesn't make it easy to keep all of your personal relationships in the state that you want them to be in. So I've just been sort of resetting my life for the last 3 weeks.
That's healthy. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Leslie, how about you?
So,
I know how you've taken some of your passions into a different direction
Yeah.
that you're.
and I might be a little different than Harrison as far as, it's funny, people keep saying the word politician. I literally am a mom. I have a 9-year-old daughter. I've lived in Hell's Kitchen for almost 20 years, and I was on my block association because I wanted to plant flowers. Honestly, that's how I started, and I wanted to beautify it. And then it kind of went up as far as, then I was on, the community council with our precinct. Then I was appointed to the community board. I think actually there's lots of ways you can change things or have a voice without necessarily winning. I mean, I would have loved to have won, and I would have loved to have represented the community, but I don't consider myself like I needed that platform to make a change. I'm on the community board. I think with other people in my community, such as you guys, and just, from very, very micro to a little bigger, we talk about issues that are important to us, and we kind of push our elected officials to go in the directions that we hear is important to the community. So I do think there are a lot of outlets that you could do. And right now, I know Harrison was talking about some of his points, and now I'm talking a lot with, like I said, I'm on the Arts and Education Committee, so I do a lot of that, and I'm the co-chair of Parks and Environment, so I'm trying to make our district a little greener. And I just ran Eric Botcher down on the street today, telling him of something that I wanted to do, and the poor guy's already sick of me. He beat me, and now he's probably sorry he did, because now I'm going to hound him for other programs that we have to implement. But
I'll help you with that. Okay.
Thank you. All the help we can get is welcome.
I have his ear to some degree, so sure. Anything else you want to add, Aimee?
Well,
I mean, you're not in politics. However, let's sort of morph this a little bit. Let's just talk about art and politics. Let's talk about, you are political. You are not a politician, but you are political. Let's talk about what the difference is.
Well, I identify as a political advocate, which means that I work for the good of a specific community, and in my case, it's indie theater community. But like Leslie, like Harrison, you've both mentioned, we have other things to do. I have a 9-to-5 job. I have a family, and one of the things I'm very happy about over the last few years is the league has gotten a little bit better and a little bit smarter about figuring out how to push a bill or piece of legislation forward. When we started, we used to just be a bunch of good-hearted people saying, this is what we want. Now we've figured out who to call, how to add signatures to a co-sponsor line, things like that, which are still feel like this brave new world of politics. But I also take a page from Leslie's book, and I just annoy people until hopefully we get what we want. But one of the things I think is fascinating about this call is we have a city, someone who ran for a city office and someone who ran for a state office, and how completely different those are, and how the avenues things that we would think would be a city issue, no, those are state. Things that are state, no, those are city. So it's a fascinating pairing of people here today.
Well, thank you for that. I think the universe did that. So let's look at that for a second, Leslie and Harrison. What are the, to help us to understand, what are the things that are much more city oriented issues, and Harrison, what are the things that are the bigger New York State issues that you would have been dealing with, and how was running for a New York State Assembly going to impact what you can do locally? I mean, it can. I mean, I used to live down the street from O'Donnell's office, and so I was in there talking all the time.
Yeah. So we started off talking about limited funding for the arts, and NISCA, I'm sure I'm preaching in the choir when I say that NISCA is woefully underfunded. Out of a budget of tens of billions of dollars, the New York State Council on the Arts has a budget of a state budget of billions and billions and billions of dollars. State Council on the Arts has a budget of less than, I believe, $50 million. And I mean, that's a lot of money. $50 million, that'd be great. But from the perspective of a state that's comprised of 20 million people, that's obviously the equivalent of like $2 per person in arts funding from our state government. It's totally unacceptable, totally crazy, totally ridiculous. And so I don't think the state has anywhere near the amount of direct funding for the arts that is required for a state that is centered on the arts. State's role in the arts primarily is in passing legislation, and so, for example, a lot of that ends up resulting in some funding. So, for example, some of the pandemic era funding came through the state, but I wonder if that's, I mean, to your point, it's can often be difficult, or to Aimee's point, to determine what's a state responsibility, what's a city responsibility. Some things that you think would be a city responsibility are actually a state responsibility, and vice versa.
Well,
but in general,
I'm curious about that. Where did the money come that reimbursed producers for lost time of their productions? I know that some were getting millions of dollars to compensate them for the lost audiences during COVID. Was that city or state? I don't know.
I think that was federal.
Yeah, if it's what I'm thinking, I think it was federal flowing through the state. But to Harrison's point, we did get this pot of money from the federal government that got turned into a state level small business grant, and arts were completely cut out from accessing that small business grant. When they wrote the legislation, they just wrote it in such a way that nonprofit arts organizations couldn't access that money. And they were having trouble at the state level giving away that money. They didn't have enough people to give it to, because there was this idea that the arts already had NISCA, so we already had our needs taken care of. But to Harrison's point, the amount of money that they've set aside does not come anywhere near to our needs. One of the things that we were excited about was the idea of a New York State WPA. That legislation, with the changeover in administration, is sort of languishing, but that is something that the state does. And to both of the things that have been mentioned by both of you, the state is where the work to change those tax breaks on those empty storefronts that allow landlords to keep their storefronts empty for sometimes decades. I mean, we all know the Manhattan Theater Source rent was doubled overnight, and it remained vacant for a full decade while that landlord just gathered up the tax breaks. That's something that you would think would be something the city could do something about, but it's at the state.
Well, I hate to.
And Bob,
okay.
the city also has funding for the arts. So the city has what was
Department
it?
of Cultural Affairs.
Department of Cultural Affairs, and the city has a budget of $100 billion. $100 billion, right? And what was one of the first things that was slashed when Adams came in and redid the budget? It was Department of Cultural Affairs. I mean, he slashed it by 34%. And some of that funding has been reinstituted through city council and other things, but on the city level, Department of Cultural Affairs, as you know, it funds, and Aimee might be able to speak probably better to this, but it funds small independent organizations or artist endeavors. It's a really important pot of money, and to slash it by 34%, that was initially what it was. It's changed a little bit. It's gotten a bunch of money back, but that's where on the city level, it's mostly in the city budget and awareness. As Harrison was saying, state was more legislative.
We used to get DCA money and we used to get NISCA money, and we don't get it anymore. It's very hard for me to explain to funders what we do. They don't understand it. I remember years ago, I was applying for Department of Cultural Affairs year after year after year. After 5 years, I asked for a meeting and I sat down with them, and they started talking to me. I don't remember what their names were, and they said, do you do this? I said, yes. Do you do this? Yes. And they started going through all the programs that we ostensibly did, and I said, we genuinely do all that. And she said, gee, I guess we should fund you then, shouldn't we? The point that she was making was that nobody really trusts or understands services to the field. They say that back then, she said that there were a lot of companies that claimed to be services to the field that really didn't offer very much. And it was unusual how much we did offer. And we started getting money from them, but then they stopped. I don't know. Every year I would do a fund proposal, and every year I would get a critique of it, and I'd change it based on the critique, and then I'd get another critique. So I finally stopped applying. NISCA funded us faithfully for at least 10 years, and then they also stopped because I think they lost money. So that's my sad story. But here I am. We're still, I find other ways to keep my business running and to keep us healthy and financially sound. So I was going to ask you something before I went off into that tangent, that personal tangent. Yeah, I guess it's a broader. Well, I'd also want to bring in people from the room if anybody does have questions. Let me see if there's anything in here. Ralph Lewis says, last night's cultural reception at the Met was very hopeful. Several NYC, New York City elected were there. Ralph, is there anything that you want to report about that? It was hopeful just simply because there were elected people were there, or was there anything else that you noted?
Well, it was in the Met. It was beautiful. You got to have past hors d'oeuvres and a full bar. You felt important for a while. But, the borough president was there. Laurie Cumbo was there. The previous borough president, who's now a council member, Gail Brewer, was there. There just seemed to be so many political people that were there for us to praise and thank them. And it's too bad there weren't more theater organizations represented there. I often feel like, you go to the Indie Theater Fund marriage thing and half the other organizations weren't at that. And I feel like we're all so busy in our own sandboxes that it might help us more if the service organizations were knowing about and attending each other's events.
I'm not aware of them. I didn't even know about last night. And the other problem that I have is I don't have a lot of money to go to these things. I can't imagine what it must have cost to go to the Met.
I am on a fixed income. It was completely free, just like a lot of things are now. You can't use money to prevent people from attending these events. So many of them don't have a fee. And if you want to go, just ask if you can come. Nobody says no.
I have to be.
I'm so glad you went. Sorry.
I have to be aware of it so that I can even ask if I can go. I didn't know what was happening. I'm sorry. Maybe I should be more aware. But I only get 150 emails a day as it is. So.
We all need to be more aware. And that's just it. I know, Bob, your sandbox is so full. You could spend 36 hours a day in your own sandbox, and so can Aimee, and so can Randy Berry, and so can Lucy Sexton. But I think for the health of the organization, we have to make sure we get all of you guys in the same room talking to each other.
Well, certainly open to that, although as long as everybody's masked. I just don't want to do another COVID
I just
session.
wanted to share quickly. Ralph, thank you for going. I'm so glad you were able to attend. I only got the invitation a week ago, so it might have been something that came together rather quickly, which might be why not everybody who should have been aware of it was aware of it. But I'm glad that you were able to go and that it was a hopeful event for you. I just already had previous engagement.
So I'm gonna go to the other talking point that I had planned on for today, which is basically the trend that we're going through right now. I was talking about the other side of things. We're all living on the wrong side of the wall, quote unquote, at the moment. We see women's reproductive rights being limited, or not even limited, just being taken away completely. There's a threat of gay rights being taken away or reversed. I had a Republican friend. He's not a friend. He's somebody that I knew from college who I can't stand. But on Facebook, when I started talking about my concerns about Trump back in 2016, he tried to calm me down by saying, "Oh, don't worry. Nobody's going to put the toothpaste back in the tube." That's what he said. Well, guess what? The Ipana tube is having the toothpaste put in. We're going back to 1950s tubes right now, and it's all going back in. So basically, this is a trend, and we have a Supreme Court that is supporting this trend. What can you say that's hopeful about where we're heading? Do you think we're just heading down a slope and we can't stop, or is there a way of stopping this? What do we do? What can we do? Anybody in the room? Help.
Something that I think is hopeful is that, the Supreme Court has been, you could argue forever, but at the very least since Bush v. Gore 20 years ago, I think it started trending in this direction, but never before until the last couple of months has there been serious discussions about how do we make this institution what we want it to be and what we think it should be, which is non-political, purely based on legal analysis. And so I think the hopeful trend is maybe there are ways that the Supreme Court should be reformed that we're now talking about more seriously. And for example, term limits, I think would go a long way in a way that we hadn't been. So it's spurring action.
It would save money on intravenous at meetings. It's crazy. So go on. Sorry.
That's it. I wish people could get engaged before we all felt like our rights were threatened. It's not worth it, but at least people are engaged now.
Well, given some things that Clarence Thomas said, you can't help but wonder what's next on the list. I put in my promotion for tonight, is censorship going to be next? Censorship's already there. They're already saying that you can't talk. The white fragility basically demands that you not talk about issues that white people will find uncomfortable. What? You can't talk about it because it makes you uncomfortable, and you can't say gay in Florida now. And books that are being censored all over the place. What is happening? How do we stop it? That's a conversation stopper, isn't it?
That's a lot. It's a lot. You know what? It's funny. We talk about these in these grand conversations and subjects, and really you can, if you whittle it down and whittle it down and whittle it down, it goes back to swing states. It goes back to swing elections. I know I'm a member of Hell's Kitchen Democrats, and we postcard to swing states all the time. We do phone calls to small, what you think is boondockville elections for, the House of Representatives all the time, because now we can't change the Supreme Court. We can, talk about it and all stuff, but that's there for a while now. And it's going to be there to stay for a long, long time. But what can be done is if you win the House and the Senate, which are very, very difficult to do, you can codify some of these, what we call rights, human rights, laws, put them into law. Now, in order to do that, you whittle down more is you get the people in these purple districts, in these swing states, you get manpower out there, and you hopefully get some Democrat that might have been in a Republic county in Kentucky or, something like that. I know it's not sexy. I know it's not like a grand answer, but it's working small and working hard and door to door, because once you get the majority, though Democrats haven't been good at this when we get the majority, but once we get the majority, then we have to really push these codifying some of these laws.
Well, that is my hope too. I know about codifying the laws, and I think that the House of Representatives we're doing fine with, but it's the Senate that we're all worried about. I don't know. I'm not going to sleep any better tonight than I have been, but thank you for at least discussing it. I see a hand raised. So Eric Rothman, do you want to make your comment or question? I saw that you put a lot into the chat. It's too much for us to deal with. Can you take like one or two points that you
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
I think that I've been watching this for a long time, and the problem with polarization is one-sided. There's been a trend ever since Nixon and beyond, for various reasons from time to time some of which I indicated, that the Republicans have developed a unanimous, very anti-democratic policy for their own purposes. The solution is for Democrats and people who are just Democrats with a small d to be very vocal, to contest every place they can, to be good at emotional arguments, and not to be afraid to state things that seem like they're not popular, or things that are not in the public media as being popular, and fight for the things that we believe in and turn the tide.
The question that comes up for me is that how does that help the people on the other side of the issues to understand what we're talking about and to really listen and really listen?
Well, there's a technological problem too. How do you actually get to them? So you have to be more compelling in the story you're telling, more compelling in the way you present it. That's why the 1-6 committee, under a Republican, by the way, who I'm sure is the one who has made it such a good, it is the vice chairman, I think, that has really made this into such a compelling story. It is that kind of bringing the message to everybody, because it is so well done, that helps to work.
Well, okay. I don't know if we can dwell there yet right now, because I see Adela has her hand up. So Adela, did you want to bring in a point or ask a question?
Just briefly before we lose all hope, I wanted to remind each of us that is involved and promoting the arts and active in the arts and that therein lies the solution. Namely, that if you have a dialogue with a person that has a different opinion to you, often rational analysis and facts may not get through, but we have to talk to people's hearts. We have to talk to people's humanity, and that's how you reach out to people that think differently from you.
Thank you. I think that's a very good answer. Thank you. Hi, Karen Dewey. I know who
Hi.
you are. There you are.
Yeah,
Yes.
you emailed. I'm listening to you all, and I used to be a Democrat, and I was actually the chairman of the Democratic Party in Waushara County. And became conservative. I married a conservative, and I still consider myself a Democrat at heart when you talk about the old style Democrat rather than the new socialist who have aligned themselves with a lot of communism and the manifesto. And I think that we are really all on the same side. I think that there's common ground. We all care about life. And we have to dig into what is not harmful and what is good for promoting wellness in our society and in our individual lives.
I agree with you. The problem is that I think different people have different ideas about what the answers are, and that's where I also agree that we need to talk to each other in a different way and be open to listening to each other more. But that even there, I get stuck because I don't know.
The thing that turns me off so much is, now just to let you know how I feel from I'm in the Midwest.
I just want you to know that you're welcome to express yourself in this room. I want this to be a safe space.
The thing that turns me off is to see our leadership, the president administration, siding with people who are burning cities and burning businesses and harming their own people. That is wrong, and they shouldn't be doing that. And there's an ulterior motive behind what they're doing and siding with this. Even the vice president was saying, we need, go get them, kind of, and Maxine Waters. And if you watch Newsmax and Fox, you'll get the other side. But okay. The mainstream media will not tell you what's really behind what's going on.
Okay.
What
was that? Somebody say something? I'm sorry. So thank you, Karen, because basically you're very much a way of demonstrating what we all are talking about here, which is that people see things in different ways, and at least if we can talk to each other civilly, I think we're making a step in the right direction. So I hear what you're saying, and I thank you for sharing that. You know that there won't be a lot of people in the room that may not agree with it. So you know that. I mean, I give you applause for coming in and saying what you said, because I always want to hear other. Not everybody else wants to hear other sides of the story, but I actually genuinely do. I do like to know what you're thinking and what you're feeling.
And Bob, not to prolong us, I probably shouldn't go here. I'll give you a microcosm though of what she was saying that happened in this city. And I'm not one side or the other, this is what happened. So when the mayoral election, if you remember, first started up, right? There was a lot of hot button issues. As it got to January or February, the issues changed to public safety immediately. It's like, it's interesting how, and all the, and I'm not saying anything specific, but it's just some of the points that we're making by Adams or Garcia and others, the conversation switched. So I guess some of the mayoral candidates started, quote unquote, reading the room, though I don't know, necessarily what that means. And it switched. So, I mean, we're talking, there are degrees of how we can discuss these issues. And I think just some of the Democrats feel that the solutions to some of these issues are much different than on the Republican side. It's not that we're saying that the issues don't exist. It's saying that our approaches to how to fix it are a lot different. And I think that's what we have to come together on. So it's not the recognizing that there's a problem, it's how do we solve the problem? And that's where I think the disconnect comes. I could be wrong, but that's kind of what we were witnessing.
I don't think we're going to be able to solve this today. I think I'm not sure. I think Adele's hand was up, so I think I already called her. What?
Fran?
Oh, Fran, I didn't see your hand up. Fran, would you like to? Yes. So
Yeah,
Karen, I'm gonna move you back into the room. Is that okay?
Sure.
Getting back to the arts and government support, I lived in Toronto in the 70s and into the 80s when the Canadian government support for the arts was at its height. And it was wonderful, but unfortunately, there were a number of people who took advantage of it in a negative way. And especially the film producers and some of the theater owners who had no reason for getting a grant if there was any kind of criteria connected. And unfortunately now the government support in Canada is not as great. It could be the economy. It can also be that they were burnt in some ways. So it isn't necessarily the panacea for helping the arts.
Okay, thank you, Fran. We've certainly entered dangerous territory, which I actually was kind of hoping would happen. Harrison, are you okay? Are you comfortable enough? Leslie, you seem to handle everything well, and Aimee, you were fine. I didn't hear from Harrison, so we've actually illustrated exactly the concern that I brought into this whole conversation, which is how differently people see things, and how when we think that we're solving a problem, it may not be solving it in the eyes of the people that have a different idea, a different way of doing things, a way of looking at things. I don't feel hopeful about where to go with this yet. I'm still working on it. It's something I've been working on for a long time, trying to find ways of communicating with people that don't agree with what we believe. And it's even exaggerated in the whole realm of politics, because suddenly the stakes are so sensitive and so delicate in politics, so people wind up screaming at each other. I guess I want to just end by saying I hope we can all eventually find something resembling common ground, and I hope that we can also enter a period somehow or other with whatever needs to happen. Leslie, you made some suggestions. Harrison, and Aimee, you both made some suggestions of ways that the tide might turn a little bit. But I think I'm not the only one in this room who's very uncomfortable with the world right now, and a little frightened. And I'll go out on a limb and be even dramatic about it. I keep imagining what it would be like to be in Germany and be somebody at home, just a citizen watching the political climate change so dramatically, so drastically, and just go, what do I do about it? Being Jewish, it's also it's a very sensitive issue for me. Being gay, it's a very sensitive issue for me right now, because I don't know what's going to happen. I'm married. Will I be married next year? I want to have hope, and I want to surround myself with people who have hope, who can help me sleep better at night, because things are concerning me very much lately, very, very, very much. And I understand that the world is changing in a way that is very pleasing to some people, and it's just, I have to say that it's not what I would have chosen. It's not the world that I would have chosen. And Leslie, Harrison, Aimee, whatever we can do to find some sort of equilibrium, I will be grateful for. Balance, and I've often talked about the pendulum swinging. Well, the pendulum has swung so extremely right now that I just don't know what to do. And I'm old enough to worry that whether I'll still be around when this pendulum either reaches a balance or swings back again. So thank you for being with me and tolerating my emotional whatever I'm going through here. Politics means a lot to me right now. I'm hoping that it is a means to creating some sort of change and making our view of the world be manifested in some ways. And That's it. That's it. I'm just at a loss. The topic is so painful for me. Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Harrison. Thank you, Aimee. Do you have any words that you want to comfort me with before we go? Nope.
I do have to run, so I wanted to just say thank you for having this conversation. I think in a lot of ways, this conversation is the hopeful work. And I do want to share that what is giving me hope in this overwhelm is that spending time in spaces where there are more like institutional, like nonprofit networking kind of events, I'm starting to hear language and hear strategies from the grassroots that small local advocates have been working towards for years is starting to trickle up. So that is a hopeful thing for me. But thank you so much for this conversation. It's giving me hope. I have to run.
Thanks, Aimee.
Bye-bye.
And I just want to acknowledge to Tita and Taris that yes, I think another sign of hope is Liz Cheney, which is something I never would have imagined my ever saying 5 years ago. But she has proven to be exactly what I'm talking about. Someone who is willing to understand the bigger picture and talk from the other side, talk from the other side of the aisle. If ever I felt that there was hope, it is watching the congressional hearings right now and actually seeing Republicans who really are really reaching across. It's not partisan right now. At least I don't think it's partisan. Somebody else may disagree with me. Let's see if anybody says something.
I have to.
Okay, so I'm going to thank you guys. Thank you guys for being with me. And I'm going to also thank my YouTube viewers, and I want to thank the room as well. We do this every week. Not this. we do conversations every week. So I hope that if you're out in YouTube land looking at us, I hope you'll consider emailing me at trunltd@aol.com, trunltd@aol.com, and be part of the room and talk to the guests and make your views known as well in the room. And we do this for free, and it's actually pay what you can, and what you can sometimes is something, I hope. So we now that we're going back into the live world, my expenses are like skyrocketing. So whatever thing you can do to support us, I would appreciate. Go to trudonate.com, trudonate.com, and support us if you can. I appreciate it. And that's it. Thank you very much. Harrison, thank you. I hope you're glad you knocked on my door.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's always a pleasure.